So, hello everyone. Hope you have wonderful morning and had some refreshments and ready to continue our session. So, my name is Yana. I'm a new postdoc here in HKU, and today I'm very pleased and incredibly honored to chair this the next panel. And it will include three presentations of 15 minutes each. And we'll begin with the first presentation between religious principalism and pragmatism, Islamic Republic of Iran and Popular Republic of China. And I'm very happy to invite here Arash Reisinezhad, Assistant Professor of International Relations, University of Tehran, and Mohsen Marzbali, Assistant Professor of Political Science, University of Mazandaran. Please.
Okay. It's my honor and pleasure to be here, and I should express my sincere gratitude, for inviting me to this prestigious conference. I have no slides, just cell phone, so it's amazing. So I'm going to talk about Iranian-Chinese relations. And through the new prism, through the new points of view, which is a religious and ideological one. Because the majority of, papers and books and articles and arguments talk about geopolitical and economic factors that shape the trajectory of Iranian-Chinese relations. But today I'm going to talk about specific religious elements that facilitates and eases the relationship between Iran and China. And I haven't, found any other great, readings and articles about this issue. So the Sino-Persian connection dates back to 200 BC. So Iranian-Chinese relation is not new. It's very old. Even the name of China, according to some documents, came from the Middle Persian because the Chinese called themselves, the country as a Zhonghua, right? But Qin Shi Huang, an emperor who united China, he dispatched his envoy and emissary to Iran, to Parthian kingdom, Mithridates II, and then the Iranian began calling the people from Zhonghua as Qin, okay, because of Qin Shi Huang and the dynasty Qin. And then the name of Qin, exported to Roman Empire and the Western literature, and the name of China, replaced by Zhonghua, right? And then we have Emperor Wu Di from the Han Dynasty in 115 BC, who dispatched again his envoy to another king of Iran. And it was a kind of official beginning of the ancient Silk Road, the most important trade route in an ancient time, extending from Xi'an to Taklamakan Desert, to the Central Asia, Transoxania, to Iran, to Roman Empire. So the ancient Silk Road was not only the trade route, but all the military invasion, followed the same route. So the Mongols attacked to China and to Iran through these routes, okay? And we have, another aspect of the ancient Silk Road. Take a look at, if we go deep down in the history of ancient Silk Road, we could see that the religious and philosophical and ideas traveled through the ancient Silk Road. The Islam expanded from Arabian Peninsula to Iran, to Central Asia, and then to Xinjiang and Eastern Turkestan, and then Central China. So ancient Silk Road gradually disappeared just because of, the discovering of American continents in the 16th and 15th century. So the epicenter of trade route changed from the vast land of Eurasia to the Atlantic Ocean. And it was at this time that the Chinese Empire and the Persian Empire both defeated by Western empires and Western powers. China after Opium War and Iran after their war with Russia lost huge territories, right? And then both countries revived their diplomatic relations in 1970s after the ping-pong diplomacy, Henry Kissinger, Richard Nixon. And then we have the Islamic Revolution in 1979 that established a kind of ideological religious government for the first time in Iran. So, bunch of books and articles talk about geopolitical factors and economic factors that shaped the relationship between Iran and China. Geopolitically speaking, Iran could control the Strait of Hormuz. Regarding energy, Iran has the second largest gas resource and the fourth largest oil resource too. And then we have, economic interconnection between China and Iran. It's really amazing that under crippling sanction imposed by the US, there has been a kind of Chinese lobby in Iran. So Chinese lobby advocates not only Chineization of Iranian markets, but also advocating a kind of Chinese model, political model, which is based on a marriage of authoritarian political system and, market-based economy. So it's a new phenomenon. It's a kind of unintentional consequence of the US sanction of Iran. So we have Chinese lobby. Now, today I'm going to talk about how, an ideological regime like the Islamic Republic could make connection with China, because the Islamic Republic from the very get-go, from the very scratch, had a kind of slogan, neither East nor West, which means opposing both Western liberalism and Eastern Marxism. However, these two countries, were successful in cementing and consolidating their relationship. How? So the question is, what are the specific religious elements that facilitates the relationship between Iran and China? Because the Islamic Republic should make its Chinese Chinese policy compatible with its ideology. So it's an ideological relation. It cannot decide whatever he wants. All the policies should be compatible with its ideology. In the paper, we argued that there are two pillars that make Iranian foreign policy towards China compatible in ideology. The first one is religious principalism, and the second one is religious pragmatism. So there are, we should differentiate between these two factors. The first one, religious principalism, is a pillar that is comprised of four different elements. The first one is a principle of, let's say in Arabic word, nafy sabil, which means the rejection of domination of any non-Muslim country of a Muslim society. So this is one element. The second one is the principle of invitation, which means that all Islamic regime has a duty to propagate Islam as a religion and increase its followers, right? The third one is tawalla and tabara, the two Arabic words. The first one means that the Islamic Republic, the Islamic regime should keep its friendly relation with Muslims, in other countries. And the other one is to staying away from the non-Muslim or infidels. So there are elements based on Islamic doctrines. And the last one is the principle of jihad. And I think all of you know about this one, that all Islamic state should defend I mean, the Muslim interest by use of military means. So these four different elements comprise or constitute the first pillar, which means that religious principalism. Apparently, there is a kind of paradox between, I mean, these pillar, and I mean the relationship between Iran and China, because China is not a Muslim country. It could, impose its domination over a Muslim country like Iran, but this Islamic instruction is subject to a specific narrative and interpretation, which means that uh, the expansion of relation with China does not conflict with the religious principles of the Islamic Republic foreign policy. Because from the point of the Islamic Republic, the policy of expanding China's influence is not the type of imperialist expansionism, like, for example, British, Americans, or Europeans, that will lead to the domination of non-Muslim country of China over the Muslim country like Iran, which means that, okay, because there has no historical background, okay, no historical background in Chinese history of, imperialist expansion. So this pillar has no contradiction with with Iranian-Chinese relation. The other one is the religious pragmatism, the second pillar. Religious pragmatism is comprised of three different elements. The first one is the expediency, which means that in a specific context, time and place, the survival should be taken into close consideration, the survival of any Islamic state. And there are two elements more, because there are two elements more. The first one, the second one is the principle of peaceful coexistence. And the last one is the principle of keeping promise, which means that keeping promise is not only a legal one, but it's a kind of religious obligation for Islamic country. So it means that according to this pillar, in a case of conflict between the policies of Chinese government, both domestic and foreign policy, for example, the suppression of Turkic Uyghurs, the Muslim Turkic Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and the principle of the foreign policy of the Islamic Republic, which is the defense of all the Muslim in the world, okay? The Islamic Republic has the right to keep its silence. Why? Because the harms of tension in relation to China are more destructive than its benefit from preserving the integrity of Islam. Again, there are two elements, religious pragmatism and religious principles, that makes the Islamic Republic's foreign policy compatible with its ideology. Again, a country, an ideological regime like Islamic Republic cannot decide whatever it wants. It should justify its policy based on ideological and religious terms. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this exciting presentation. We'll continue with the next presentation and I'm very glad to invite here Manochehr Dorraj, professor of Department of Political Science, Texas Christian University, who aims to question the role of religion in Iran-China relations. What are the larger implications? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by thanking David Palmer and Lunar Tong and their colleagues for the kind invitation to be here and have an audience with you. I have been to mainland, I have been to Taiwan, never to Hong Kong. So I am very much curious to see this beautiful land that I've heard about it for a long time and explored it. I should also say that I've been working on China, Middle East, China, Iran since 2005, but I've never really worked on element of religion and the role that it plays in this bilateral tie. Briefly, I have, covered it in my previous publication, but never had an opportunity to go into it in depth. And I started doing the research on this, and I have shared my first draft with you. I have learned that there's a whole lot to look at, which is very not just tangible, but significant. But at the end of my paper, I end my paper with discussing the relevance and irrelevance of religion, which is a very legitimate question so far as I'm concerned in this relationship. Professor Reisinezhad's presentation made my job much easier. He went over the broad brushes of historical development and events that mediated this relationship. So it allows me to be more specific, and I'm going to do that. I begin with a survey of the pre-Islamic period in the relationship between the two countries, which was very significant, envisioned two empires. And let me just briefly remind you what Persian Empire, you all know more about Chinese than Persian Empire. Persian Empire at its height included what is modern day Egypt, included what is modern day India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, included large swath of Central Asia and Eurasia, and its western border went today's Iranian plateau, and its western border went as far as current day Romania. Okay, so we are talking about a vast, mighty empire of West Asia versus a vast, mighty empire of East Asia that are close enough to do trade, have diplomatic ties, have bilateral cultural give and take. A lot of us love Chinese food. I should let you know that the origin of it goes back to a lot of influence of Persian food and Chinese food and cuisine. In Tang Dynasty in particular, there was great deal of fascination with Persian poetry that is known throughout the world as iconic poetry, and vice versa. Interest in Chinese paper, Chinese china, ceramic was immense. So you have two grand empires that were close enough to do trade, diplomatic, cultural mutations and ties and give and take, yet far enough that never fought wars. So they came in a way with a clean slate that facilitated this give and take in many ways. Conflict, yes, there was, but major war, there was none. You contrast that with European encroachment on Persian Empire and later Iran, the contrast cannot be more clear why there is this goodwill that despite some of the religious or ideological conflict on the surface, or what could be potentially conflictual between an atheist regime based on Marxist-Leninist principle versus an Islamic regime, but I would argue that that is increasingly going to be irrelevant as my talk will reveal. Let me go to pre-Islamic period then. Four religion dominated pre-Islamic Iran, and these were respectively Buddhism. Some of the major original texts that brought Buddhism into China was done by some of the Persian princes in Kushan region of Iran. In particular, this was very much in vogue, and early development of Buddhism had great deal of Persian imprint on it. The second one is Nestorian Christianity, and under Sassanid dynasty, when Zoroastrianism became a state religion of Iran, Zoroastrianism also found major inroad through Persian traders, businessmen, and migrants to China. In Hanoi region, which was then part of the Chinese Empire, these Persian-speaking people were particularly prominent in their presence and in their impact. And the fourth major religion of pre-Islamic period is, of course, Manichaeism, which is known for its unworldly, stoic approach toward life. And Manichaeism also made the major inroad in southern and central region. And Manochehism was embraced by Uyghur Khanate, which was the group that now we know them as Uyghurs in Western China. And when they were defeated, both Zoroastrianism in 8th century, Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism were banned under Tang dynasty temporarily. So it drove these religions underground. They were not extinguished by any imagination. Their influence continued up to 18th century. I'm sorry, 17th century in China, but they had more or less an underground life. With Islam, the story is different. As Persians are conquered by Arab armies in the 7th century, and they convert to Islam, original spread of Islam in China takes place under the auspices and influence of Persian-speaking people, both what are now we call Iranians, Afghans, Tajiks, all could be under that category because all of that was part of the Persian Empire back then. So with the spread of Islam in China, several things I in my paper cover some of the underlying theoretical issues that we need to be informed by as we try to understand the larger context that Iran-China relation under the Islamic period takes place. Some of the scholars argue that whenever the dominant minority, ethnic minority in China, was in need of revitalization, civilizationally speaking, this revitalization came from peripheries of Chinese empire. And one of these peripheries were, of course, Muslim entities within and outside Chinese empire. And such give and take often not only revitalized Chinese civilization, but also revitalized Islam in the process. So let's roll back to more recent times. One of the things that we discover is that a major Chinese philosopher who was also influenced by Karl Jasper named Han Yu-wei argued that Confucianism is not just a Chinese religion. It's a way of life. It's a religion that has many things to teach to humanity, despite where they might be, despite time, space, geographical location, etc. And therefore, he argued for building bridges between Confucianism and other great religious traditions, and foremost among them, Islam, that the two can mutually, not only they're not exclusive, but they can enrich one another. And this can only enrich Chinese civilization. And this became a new era of interest in what might be, in particular, in common between Confucianism, Taoism, but also Sufi Islam, which is a particular brand of Islam with the very deep spiritual appeal and depth, which is more universal even today, the way that Rumi, the renowned Persian poet, is now followed around the world, is a ramification of that. And should also let you know that the city of Isfahan in Iran, a beautiful historical city, was a major transit point during the ancient Silk Road. That transit of good, but also culture and ideas went through it, and through Persian Empire to Europe eventually. When we come to more recent time, and I'm going to jump over some of the historical periods given the restriction of time that I have, we would discover that in early 20th century, given against this historical backdrop of the two empires and their histories, we come to a point that in early 20th century in Rome, there is a mutual agreement between China and Iran to start establishing relationship. As China goes through transformation under Mao, embracing communist ideology, and Iran under the Shah was a close ally of the United States. It got caught, that is, the Shah got caught in entanglement and animosities of the Cold War, and relations became frozen, if you will, if not acrimonious. And the turning point comes in 1971 as Nixon tries to open the door to China, and Iran being close ally of the United States. In 1971, Shah sends his sister Ashraf to China to establish relation. Mind you that Iran among Middle Eastern nations is one of the forerunners in having relation or establishing relation with China. Saudi Arabia, for example, does not establish relation with China until 1990. And of course, one of the things that we should also bear in mind, and I argue this has to do with two nations that not only were grand empire, but also have a very deep sense of identity of their own, China and Persian Empire, that they both have nationalist revolutions, the constitutional revolution. In Iran, you have constitutional revolution of 1905 or 9, early 20th century. In China, you have the nationalist revolution and uprising led by Sun Yat-sen. And then you have Mao challenge of Chiang Kai-shek government, pro-Western government of Chiang Kai-shek. In Iran, you have uprising of the Mossadegh nationalist era that was defeated because of the CIA and British intelligence coup d'etat. And finally, in China, you have a 1949, 1950 revolution led by Mao. In Iran, you have 1979 revolution. All of these have very distinct anti-Western and nationalist sentiment. And one of the points of, I would call, psychological identification between Iran and China is that they both have been grand civilizations that have been brought low by imperial powers. In China, it's called the period of great humiliation, so to speak. So after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, China's Muslims were a source of great deal of curiosity for new Iranian leaders. And they were, of course, in earlier stages of the revolution, very much into idea of exporting the revolution to other regions, especially also China was not excluded. Clandestinely, they managed to build mosques and Islamic seminaries in Xinjiang area. Chinese government stepped in and made it known to Iranian government that they would not tolerate any proselytizing activities in its own territory. This would be violation of Chinese sovereignty, and soon Iranian government learned that they have to respect Chinese red line. As Iran-Iraq war, the only country ensued, the only country in the world that was willing to sell weapons to Iran were North Korea and China, and Iran's national security became embedded in China's support. And as the period of war ended in 1988, Iran needed China because all the Western powers have boycotted Iran economically to rebuild the country. So China became deeply embedded in Iranian security apparatus, in Iranian economy. And as this dependency increased, Iran was less and less likely to speak out on treatment of Uyghurs and on China's internal relation with its Muslim population. I have 1 minute and I will jump. I would engage in a leap and give you my conclusions. That I think increasingly regarding religion as autonomous variable, to use social science term, or entity in this relationship is wrong-headed. Religion as a form of human consciousness ultimately is constantly interpreted and reinterpreted for political and instrumental reasons. We have seen that. It's not frozen in time and space. Therefore, what we see, and this is not unique to Iran, at the end of my paper, I briefly talk about Turkey, Saudi Arabia. Early in the relationship, there was a contest between Saudi Arabia and Iran in proselytizing activity in Xinjiang region. Saudi Sunni fundamentalists versus Iran Shiite. Soon Iran learned that majority of Chinese Muslims are Sunni. And secondly, majority of Uyghurs are Turkish speaking and from Turkish descent. Therefore, by definition, its appeal to Chinese Muslim is limited. They become content to bringing a few of them to seminars in Rome to teach them Shiite theology and jurisprudence. And that's where it was. That way they would not cross Chinese red line. Relations would expand. And of course, under the Trump administration and maximum pressure, Iran has been pushed further into the arms of China, and now Russia under Raisi's government. Eastern strategy has become even elevated and more invigorated in the process. And therefore, the whole issue of treatment of Uyghurs has gone to the back burner. Let me share with you one last idea that I think is something that we are going to witness as we move forward. And this is not just Iran. We can also speak of Turkey, we can speak of Saudi Arabia, all the other countries that had not only interest, but were engaged in Xinjiang region. What we are witnessing as the political behavior of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar in particular, indicates there's a drive toward a strategic autonomy in the region. Countries that used to be close ally of the United States no longer are willing to live by that rule of the game. Look at behavior of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. They're courting Russia. They are expanding relation with China. And as that goes on, and dependence on China and prominence of China globally expands, I would argue religion will play less role in determining the bilateral ties. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Many are looking for an alternative to American power. And the second one, as China expands its ties, it has to make sure that it does not step on any national and religious sensitivity, therefore maintaining good respect not only for Islam at home, more religious tolerance, and respect for human rights of Uyghurs in particular, I would argue is going to serve China's economic diplomacy well abroad. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Dorraj, for raising such fundamental historical questions. So our third speaker, Birol Baskan, will give a speech on tracing China and in the Turkish Islamist imagination. Please, the floor is yours.
First of all, I want to thank you all, Professor David Palmer, for this conference and inviting me to this enchanting city of Hong Kong. I now understand why the British wanted to keep this place so bad. I also want to thank Mrs. Lunar for flawless undertaking of the logistics of the conference. Coming from Turkey, where the administration drags on and on and on, her effectiveness in dealing with the arrangement is fascinating, and I would like to thank for that. So everybody talk about the history. My paper does not go the depths of history, even though Turks and Chinese have really long history. So let me just say a few words just to follow the others' lead on this. Turkic people, according to the official historiography, originated in Central Asia, steppes of Central Asia, where they were neighbors of the Chinese civilization. And the China was, of course, agricultural society, very rich, very populous, and then the Turks are nomadic people who are living beyond the civilized world. So the Turkic people have always been headache for the Chinese political system. And then the Turks proudly claim that the Chinese built the China Wall to prevent the Turks from invading China. This history, does that really matter for my topic? It does. Why? Because if you go read more deeply about the Turkish, even Turkish official historiography, I'm not talking about the Turkish alternative histories proposed by, let's say, pan-Turkist or pan-Islamist, you see this element there about China. China has an extremely negative image in the Turkish imagination, historical imagination, because of this very contentious history between the Turkic nomadic people. So it's not about Uyghurs. The Uyghur problem is just continuation of a history which is going back to thousands of years ago. There is this, for example, even today, you can see an article mentioning Bumin Khan. Bumin Khan is the, I don't know, it's the Chinese name, I guess, Yili Khan. He's the founder of the Göktürk Khaganate in Central Asia. For example, he has this advisor inscribed in the stones to the Turkish nation. And then it's all about Chinese, how the Chinese are deceptive, how they are trying very hard to divide the Turkic people, undermine the Turkic people, and so on and so forth. And one of his advices is really hilarious. Don't accept Chinese bride, because that is the typical Chinese strategy to send Chinese bride to the Turkish Khans, and the Turkish Khans are somehow mesmerized by the beauty and then the strategy of the Chinese brides that they just give up their national thing. So so today, 2017, 2018, you can see Bumin Khans, who lived in the 6th century AD, his advice to the Turkish nation cited by an Islamist. So the history might have gone, but it is still vivid in the Turkish imagination. And of course, when the sections of those societies who are very much sympathetic to the Uyghur problem brings up these stories again and again. And about this history, finally, let me just make my one last note. If you watch this great Chinese drama series, The Long Ballad, I don't know its Chinese name, but the main female actors is beautiful Dilruba Dilmurad. I guess from her name, I can say she's a Uyghur Turk, but playing a Chinese character. Of course, that's the irony of it, fighting against the Eastern Turkish Khaganate. So it's a very complex reimagining of history. So that history is not irrelevant today. That history is still vivid and still capitalize on groups which are trying in one way or another undermine the Turkish-Chinese relations. Let me go back to my topic. So Islamist imagination of China is part of that historical history. How Islamists imagine China. Islamism, by the way, is not Islam. Islamism is an ideology, is a view of Islam. It's a view about Islam, what Islam is, what Islam is not. And it was born in the 19th century in the Turkish context against the imperial aggression and exploitation of the West, of the Eastern society, and especially Muslim societies. And Islamism was born as a pan-Islamic movement, pan-Islamic in the sense of promoting, preaching, and recommending unity and solidarity among Muslims. So the previous speakers talk about Iranian foreign policy, and those similar argumentations are brought up by Islamism to argue that we Muslims, whether we are living in Turkey or in elsewhere, we have to care about other Muslims, whether they are in India, for example, Kashmir. Why Kashmir is a problem of Turkish Muslims? Why the Uyghurs is a problem of Turkish Muslims? Why Palestine is a problem of the Turkish Muslims? Because it is according to the Islamism construction of Islam, that is what Muslims should do. Muslims should show solidarity. Muslims should care about other Muslims. That's why it becomes not an Uyghur issue, it's a Muslim issue. So the Islamism brought up this idea in the 19th century. And since then, Islamism always imagined China in a particular way. Of course, in the 19th century, China was no longer the threat to the Turkish nation. It was Britain, it was Russia, it was France. And the Islamism was, in terms of what kind of a China it imagined, I guess this prophetic tradition, it's called hadith in Arabic. There is this prophetic tradition Islamism revived, and it's a very famous one. It says, utlubul ilma wala fi sin, which says seek knowledge even if it is in China. So this hadith is fabricated. It is fabricated a long time ago, but Islamism revived this hadith very vehemently. And still today, that hadith is propagated all over the Islamists. The idea was why Islamism was bringing up this hadith, which is fabricated. Part of the deal was to defend Islam against the accusation that Islamism was against sciences. So by bringing up this hadith, basically Islamism was saying, look, Islam is not against sciences. You see, the Prophet said, go even to China to seek knowledge. But there, of course, the particular choice of China shows you what Islamism then imagined of China, which is really, really far away country, right? In that period, which is the period from the late 19th century all the way to 2049, which is the Communist Revolution, Islamism did not pay attention to China per se, but Islamism paid attention to Muslims in China. But then in the late 19th century, early 20th century, the suppression of the Uyghur Muslims was not on the agenda. What was on the agenda was the religious rituals and religious beliefs of the Uyghur Muslims. And Islamism then was very, very critical of Uyghur Muslims. According to the many reports published by the Islamist journal saying that, oh, Uyghur Muslims are no longer Muslims. They are so deviated from true Islam that they are no longer Muslims. Of course, why this is a problem? Why someone care about religious rituals and practices of Uyghur Muslims then? Again, going back to the period. The period was, time is up. Okay, 5 minutes? Okay, I was just starting. So, sorry, Anya, look, my paper is 20,000 words, so no way I can summarize it in 15 minutes, so I encourage you to read it, and then if you want to learn. So I will just go as it comes to my mind. So in the late 20th century, why they cared about the wrong religious beliefs and rituals of the Uyghur Muslims? It is because Islamism's main criticism of the existing living Islam was that, oh, Muslims were not truly living up to true Islam. They deviated from true Islam. That's why the Muslim world is lagging behind the West. And Islamism's solution was, okay, let's discover the true Islam, which is in the Quran and the Hadith. Let's recover what true Islam is. Then we will see, we will rise again, and we are going to compete with the West. That's number one problem, number one issue in the Islamist agenda. So China is not in the Islamist agenda. And China has not entered Islamist agenda until 1949. What happened in 1949? Of course, the Communist Revolution. The Communist Revolution was shocking to the Islamists. The reason being is that the main Islamist argument for the modernity was religion is natural to humans. So humans cannot live without religion, right? This was very a strong belief they propagated and fought with the seculars of the time. So what was happening right across the Black Sea, which is Russia, Soviet Union, again a communist revolution, going atheist. Then on the other on the other side of the world, China was again going atheist. So this was going very much against their hardcore belief that in the naturalness of religion. by implementing atheism, by embracing atheism, which is like 1 billion people, the China was undermining a deep belief held by Islamism. So Islamism became very much disturbed by what's going on in China. And then, of course, before the Chinese Revolution, there was this state in what they call Eastern Turkestan, now today Xinjiang, the Islamism and then its adherents claim that, I don't know the history of that region, there was a state called Eastern Turkestan Islamic Republic. And what happened with the communist revolution, what happened is that this state destroyed. And then the political elite of that state, many of them escaped from China, first to Pakistan, and then they came to Turkey and settled. Turkey gave them citizenship. They right now sons and grandsons of all those original Uyghur people are still in Turkey. And they became very, very active in terms of bringing up the issue of Uyghurs from day one. So constantly, every year or two, you see a report about Uyghur Muslims and China, how China is so anti-religion, so anti-Islam, and that's why they are suppressing the Muslims. So this period started with 1949 and lasted until how many minutes I have? 1 minute? Until 1980s. What happened in the 1980s? Of course, China transitioned to market economy, which was celebrated by Islamism for exact reason. That transition to market economy signaled to Islamism that China realized that it cannot destroy religion. China embraced the fact that religion is so natural to human. But there is this celebratory moment in the 1980s that finally China understood that it was a mistake. So from starting in the 1980s on, Islamism became much more softened on China, and also expanded its scope of interest about China. And with this sentence, I am ending. So China is no longer about Uyghurs. China is no longer, still, Islamism cares a lot about the Uyghur problem, constantly bringing up that issue in their journals. But China is no longer anti-religion. China is no longer anti-Islam. But more importantly, for Islamism right now, China is a superpower candidate. So this is what constitutes today Islamism inner core, which is there's an anger about China because of the Uyghur problem, but there's also admiration about China because China is doing what no other Muslim country could do, which is challenging the US and challenging the West. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baskan, for this exciting presentation. And without further ado, I would like to start our discussion session and invite here to the stage all our presenters today. And meanwhile, I would like to present you our discussant of our panel today, Mr. Kim-kwong.
Thank you. Oh, I'm a retired person, so I can speak freely without any jeopardizing of any institutional interests. So to make it particular, it is after I read and heard the presenters, I'm facing three eminent scholars who had vast experience, knowledge, years of teachings, research, 240 footnotes in 30-some pages, meticulously done and with a lot of insight, which is totally injustice for them if they have to squeeze all their knowledge within just 15 minutes of time, except the last few conclusions remarks, which we missed the bulk of it. Especially the content part is more important. And also it is an impossible task to trying to respond to all this well presented and documented research involving so many different disciplines already: religious studies, geopolitics, economics, and also histories, and also in different areas from China to Persia to Turkey, and to the contemporary time, including even the Saudi Arabia, the Arabic state at large. So having said that, I still have to be entrusted by the task by Professor Palmer that do some response on that. My background was basically two areas, and I'm a theologian, religious studies, and also in China studies, in contemporary China studies, especially in the politics and religious policies. All three of you have touched upon the Islams and also China. And all three of you are looking at the contemporary engagement between China and atheist states versus a very religiously dominated or influenced entity like Turkey and also Iran in this case. And all three of you have touched upon two very important areas. First of all, the Uyghurs, and secondly, the continuous engagement between these two and the countries via the BRI, Belt Road Initiative, be it the old Silk Road or the contemporary versions of it, the Belt Road initiatives. And all three of you are looking at some kind of speculative, what will be the role of either the religion in terms of the China engagement with Iran or Turkey, if there's any role, or how important is that, and why also as Islamic state like Iran were willing to engage with an atheist state with various jurisprudential explanations, and also in the Turkish case from the Islamist perspective on contemporary imaginative narrative of Islam in China. There's a couple points I'd like to point out first before I respond individually. First of all, in China's policy, there's a clear distinction between the policy for the national minorities and the religious policies. And in the Uyghurs case, it's basically more fall under the national minorities, because out of the 30-some millions of Muslims in China, about 1/2 or less than 1/2 is the Uyghurs, and the rest, like about another 50%, are the Huis, which was more Arabic speakings versus the Turkish dialects. But having said that, the priority of the policies, first of all, is the national securities. And unfortunately, Xinjiang, where all three of you refer to as the Muslim-dominated areas, are within the very strategic Belt Road Initiative through-race. So the whole securitization of the region seems to be something to do with the planning for the BRI right at the beginning at this stage, even before that, so that it will be certain kind of security corridor for China to have access to the European continent via Central Asia. So Uyghurs just happen to be in there. But when I look at the Muslims and other Muslims in China, the Huis, their engagement with the Islamic world are quite intense, like with Egypt, Syria, Pakistan, and other areas, which they have totally different understanding and treatment by the government vis-a-vis the BRI. So that's something I like to, first of all, like to point out that there are separate issues, maybe that we may have to look at the security issues policy, national minorities policies, and as well as the religious policy on Muslims in general. And also when I look at the Uyghurs in other parts China other than Xinjiang, their treatments by the governments are totally different. So it's a Xinjiang governments versus other governments on Xinjiang territorial areas than to Uyghurs in particular. So there's something that's very a bit on the complex side. And secondly, some of you have mentioned about the attempts of the Iranians or the governments to be engaged with the visit or whatever with the whether religion is a link or proselytizing the Sunnis from the Shiite perspective. But there is a group of people which I find it missing in all your presentation. That is the Persian-speaking Tajiks in China, and they are Shiites, Islamic, Ismaili Shiites. Yet I was there. I've been working in Xinjiang for many times, and I visited that particular Turkish areas many times, and they all learned Farsi. To my surprise, actually, and I wonder what will that possible link to that if this is a Persian connection, or if not, why not? Which there seems to be the most logical place to start with. Now, and first of all, I like to, and then I respond to some of my sort of, not respond, but basically to prompt for further discussions and hopefully more discussions on the whole areas. And for Arash presentations on the rationale behind the Iranian governments engaging with the Chinese authority, and without speaking out for the predicaments of some of the treatments against the Uyghurs, was quite clear about from the jurisprudential perspective. But there's a presumption there, presume that China is not threatening. There's no threat of China towards Iran. That's the first principles. There's no threatenings. Secondly, expedience that we all note. On the threatening part, that is presumed that China's experience was similar to the contemporary Iranian experience of being exploited by the West, and so therefore we have a much more compassionate understanding and empathetic towards like Iran, and we are not going to be expanding and rule over Iran. Yes, but on the BRI's perspective, I just like to raise one interesting thought. That is, people are now talking about the like economic colonialisms, economic imperialisms. And just look at the trade, like 2 years ago, the trade between China and Iran. China sells to Iran about 32 billion USDs, and Iran buys from China. Iran buys from 30 billions, and yet China buys from Iran with about 3.4 billions, 1 to 9 factors. And then when I look at the what they sell with all the telecom, communications, transport infrastructure technologies. I was in the Isfahan subway the day they opened. Wonderful, all made in China, even still in Chinese signs. Haven't really have time because it was test run at that time. So, and the software, I look at it, it's all in Chinese. So therefore, would there be a dependence to a certain extent that becomes a domination? And if that's the case, how do you assess the national threat in there and versus others? And then I was just about the same time, I was at that time in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Iran, and some kind of exchange. And many of them complained to me that in the BRI, they have repeatedly asked China to give them actually factories to manufacture the commodity goods. But Chinese only sell us goods, but never give us the factories. And so the dependency, would that be also part of the discussion in the wider BRI projections that, yes, China has no so-called military dominations, but what about the soft power initiative in terms of commerce, in terms of finance, in terms of all the infrastructure software, I wouldn't say control, but the over-dependence? Would that be a point that in the jurisprudential perspective, it will be the principalisms that will arise one day in the days to come? And for the Professor Dorraj's a wonderful historical presentations, it reminds me of last night I was having spinach. It was called in Chinese bo cai, the vegetable from Persia, dated back about in the Chinese literature about 550 AD. So it's from something from Persia, which I just ate, and the name carries that too. And about the lack of the dominations in historical sense, I mean, you mentioned about it wasn't any war at that time, and also mentioned by the Arash about the prince seeking refuge in China. But having said that, if I also claim from the historical perspective, 644 AD in Tang Dynasty, actually the government, the emperor established Persian prefecture, and the capital was now actually in the Zagros in Bachuristan in Iran now. So actually there was an extension and ambition to have a vassal state called Persian prefecture under the administration of the Xi'anfu at the time, capital special district and established for the attempt of taking over the place. So what about this non-domination part of it? Historically, and even in the contemporary now, the software and all others possibilities. Yes, how about the Eastern sensibilities? Is there also a major distinctive difference in terms of religious studies that for the Abrahamic traditions, monotheistic religions, there are always exclusivities. That's why we have a lot of tension between Christians and Muslims. But in the Chinese religiosity, it's always polytheistic, even pantheistic, and also multiple loyalties. And that Eastern sensibility, along with the like Confucius of harmony, that will be a more like encompassing situation. But how would it apply into the like Islamic connection with China? Given that China is Islam is monotheistic religion, Abrahamic traditions. And finally, just to throw in something very interesting is that your wonderful presentation on that Turkish and China trade, I just checked, is about 5 billion to 8 billion like mutual. So isn't that so-called off weight? But having said that, the more the Turkish-speaking Uyghurs asking for their help from international communities, the more attention will be paid for the Xinjiang. Yet at the same time, China is emphasizing on the BRI will be having more securitization on the region. So on the one hand, yes, we are looking at China's rising economic, which is good, but on the same time, if it's dependent on BRI, then China will be having more and more pressure over in the Xinjiang areas. And that will also work not possibly against the Islamists, like in the current future, ironically, looking at the like increased economic activity of China, at the same time, increased pressure on the Uyghurs. And how would that like be creating a certain resentment on that? And finally, the whole Islamism's projection on China, or the imagination on the 3 different stages, were based on certain understanding of the unknown of China, and later on some kind of very flimsy report of negative on China, and later on more access to China, and always against the background of the Jews. I read about this 40 footnotes on that. But at the same time, these 3 also parallel on the self-identity, self-imagination of the modern idea of Chineseness or Chinese nationalism, identical on the same 3 period of time. At the time, we don't know who we are, but now we are now trying to be strong against everyone. Now we are a bit open on different times. So how are those 2 sort of mirrored within each other in a very convoluted fashion is something that I just throw into the picture. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your insightful, very insightful comments. And maybe I suggest to, if you have comments, and then we will continue with question from our online participant and in person.
Okay. Okay, thanks for your comments. It was really precious. I have 2 quick comments. First is that regarding Sassanid era 640 AD, at the time, as far as I know, the Persians saw Chinese tongue as an external force to save them from the Arab invasion. So the last Shahanshah or kings of Sassanid, the Persian Sassanid, he requested an aid from Gaozong, the emperor of Tang, to save the country from the Arabs. But it was a kind of unsuccessful situation. So that's why there is no, negative domination in a history of Iran-China's relation. However, regarding Persian-speaking Shia Ismaili Tajiks, the problem is that the Islamic Republic of Iran does not take, the destiny of non-12 Shia into close consideration. So there are two branches of Islam, Shia and Sunni. And in Shia and Sunni, there are, again, a smaller branch too. But Shia Ismaili is a kind of minority, and the Islamic Republic doesn't, consider them. So that's why they don't, talk about Shia Ismaili. And also for Shia Ismaili Tajiks, the Tajik identity is more important than the religious one. And unfortunately, in Iran, the political system does not respect to national identity, just a religious identity. So for the Islamic Republic, Islam is more important than Persianness or Iranianness, and it's the source of an origin of all, tension between the polity and the society in a country. But the most important, issue that you pointed about the economic domination of China in Iran, in current Iran. Well, in a recent 5 years after the JCPOA and the victory of the hardliners in Iran and the beginning of the so-called the Look East or Eastern strategy, there has been a kind of new opposition towards China's position in Iran's foreign policy and economic, context, manifested by all the slogans chanted by the young generation. So young generation in Iran, by and large, they are trying to frame a kind of, or fabricate a kind of a negative view towards China, not because China is bad, but they do it just because as a reaction to the foreign policy of the government. So that's why they are very sensitive about the recent Chinese position towards the Iranian three islands in a Persian Gulf, Bu Musa, the greater tomb, and the smaller tomb, when he traveled to the UAE and he claimed that, okay, these three islands are part of UAE, and it was a kind of national opposition, a hatred towards China, and it's beginning of something new, phenomenon in the country. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for your comments. I was very impressed by range of issues that you covered in all of our papers. I will be very brief because my colleague, Professor Reisinezhad, spoke to a lot of points that I also want to talk about. You're absolutely right. The strategic position of Xinjiang as a place that much of the Belt and Road, I should say, takes the commodities that are produced from eastern China through railways, through roads, to Central Asia, and from there to Iran, Turkey, Europe. So that region has to be pacified. If there's political resistance and turmoil, that is contrarian to long-term. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Could you hear me back there? Okay. My sisters, when I was little, they told me, you need no microphone, you have stolen one. So I have taken that advice. I don't use microphone. Anyway, so part of the larger equation, and there is a debate within Iranian elite that they say this whole, that China is suppressing religious freedom and all that is a smokescreen. The real issue is the natural and mineral resources, oil and gas that is found in the region of Xinjiang. And China wants to make sure that that region is pacified for its long-term Belt and Road success. So that's the larger issue. The second issue that you mentioned, the type of economic dependencies that are emerging, how are they different from previous type of, let's say, colonial type of economic dependence? I think we really cannot understand the larger picture and including the role that religion plays in this relationship without understanding not only the role as it is, but also the perception of role of the United States looms huge. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, for better or for worse, the policy of US has been one of economic strangulation, sanctions after sanctions that has lasted for the 44 years. The worst of it came under Trump. And then political destabilization, containment, constant trend of regime change has been looming on the horizon. When you look at, and you have to put yourself in the seat of power in Tehran, when you look at this configuration of forces, and it's not just the United States, it's West Europe and their allies, are arrayed against you to get rid of you in one way or another, China then looms as a lifeboat or as a lifeline economically. Therefore, no matter how unfair some of the economic ties might be, and China has used the sanctions in a very shrewd way to get an advantage. If you cannot trade in dollar, we stipulate that you have to buy our goods, and you have to buy it in yen, and we keep it in our banks. Under normal conditions, no nations are readily will accept that. But when you're under those sanctions and your whole economic lifeline is under question, you would. So the attitude of the elite, at least, toward China is not one of colonial power at all, but one of an instrument of survival of the regime, economically, politically, militarily, etc. China played a significant role in development of Iran's nuclear structure. China provided Iran early on with missile technology that now everybody is complaining about. And China was the major power that came in when all the other powers left China to invest in its oil and gas sector and to rebuild the country after war-torn region, especially in the south after war with Iraq. So, but at the same time, I think Arash just mentioned this, it's very important to understand this dynamic as well, that as Iranian regime becomes less popular at home, as its policies become more repressive, and last year we saw women life freedom movement that engulfed the youth, and how legitimacy of the regime is increasingly under question, and China comes across as enabler and empowerer of the regime, clearly there's a backlash, especially among younger generation, against China, because it provides it with the technology of surveillance, suppression, etc. Even some of the instruments come directly from China. So that dynamic is underway, but at the same time, there's a realization that when we needed China, in case of Iraq invasion of Iran, China came to our aid by providing us weapons. So there is that duality and that dynamic at work that projects the image of China in a very complex way. And the last point that I want to talk about is Confucianism emphasis on harmony versus Islam and Christianity emphasis on proselytizing and on exclusivity, that my way is the best way, etc. And so far as Iranians have given up converting or recruiting Xinjiang Muslims, and Chinese are not too imposing Confucianism on Iran, they have very symbolically and culturally Confucius Institute, which is very low key. I think that coexistence will continue, and that would not be a point of contention between the two countries.
Thank you very much, sir, for your comments. And of course, I congratulate you for finishing the whole paper. First of all, about the Uyghur issue, of course, there is this objective reality, how China treats Uyghurs. This is different from the subjective reality that in the minds of the Islamists. Islamists imagine things that might be entirely different and opposite from what China is actually doing. Part of the thing is that they have their own truths. They have their own constructions of history and reality. So Islamists have been living in the post-truth age for a long time. We just came to that, but they have been already in the post-truth age. They have their own realities. And honestly, I don't think that they are even interested in what the objective reality is. I mean, the part of the problem is that they are in an ideological rivalry with alternative secular movements like nationalism, like Kemalism, like other movements. And then Islamism is in rivalry with them. And then for them, Uyghur issue is that to show how strongly you defend an issue, right? It's a moral issue. It's an issue of having a higher moral ground. So I don't think that they are even interested in what the truth is. So myself, I'm just trying to construct how they see the world rather than what is reality. I myself, I have never been to Xinjiang, and I really don't know what's going on there. And so I cannot authoritatively speak what's true, what's not true. About the, you raised that question of the rise of China. Again, it's, and then the consequence of that rise for the Uyghur problem. I mean, again, Islamists are two kinds right now about the rise of China. One side admires it clearly because, you know, Islamism origin is about the rise of the West. And then the whole project was about to change this balance of power between the Muslim world and then the West. And this is something Islamism could not do. I mean, still Islamic world vis-a-vis the West is weak, but China is doing what Islamism was aspiring. So this is, of course, I'm doing a psychological analysis, which I don't want to, but this is clearly in the between the lines. There's an admiration of what China is doing. And then if China and US is not going to engage in any global rivalry, Islamists are going to propagate that they should be in a rivalry. It's not just about Americans, I guess. It's about the others also want to see this rivalry unfolding. About the Uyghur issue, I guess the consequence of the rise of China about Uyghur issue, I guess there's a positive consequence. If you look at the Islamist writing of the 1970s, 1980s is less, but 1960s, 1970s, there is always this this idea that Eastern Turkestan is going to be independent again. Nobody is talking about that because China is so powerful economically, militarily, and so on and so forth. It's almost a dream right now. So acceptance of this fact, and then actually is good because you are coming to the sense of a reality. You are right now accepting that this establishment of an independent Turkestan is an impossibility. And then you might follow a much more reasonable, much more rational approach to the problem, which is maybe you should sit down with China and then try to solve the things in a peaceful way. And some Islamists, especially those who are close to the government, are propagating this view. Look, we cannot solve this problem if we do not talk with China. And this is the same approach Islamists are approaching the Palestinian issue. Right now, Arabs fought with the Israel and then defeated, and they cannot solve the Palestinian problem. So the Turkish Islamists say that, look, I mean, if you cannot defeat Israel, this is a reality, and then let's talk. Maybe then we can help the Palestinians. No, I'm not saying that the Islamists don't believe that there's a Uyghur problem. All Islamists, without any exception, believe that China is suppressing the Uyghurs. They differ, however, in how you can help the Uyghurs in China. And I guess this is a very rational, there's a very good way of approaching the problem, just both helping the China to solve its problem, but also helping the Uyghurs to come to terms with certain reality, especially expats, of course. Expats are much worse than the people who are living actually in China. So this rise of China, the second one is, I guess, is the positive consequence of the idea that, I guess, Islamism is clearly distinguishing into two poles. One pole is this rationalistic, pragmatic Islamism, which is preaching communication and collaboration with China, and then help the Uyghurs, but there is other pole which is increasingly marginalized, is still promoting fighting China. And in this regard, that's really unfortunate, falling into radical Islamism, and even to the point of like praising Osama bin Laden because, apparently some of his men are from Uyghurs, and then they have their own Islamic movements who are waging terrorist attacks in Xinjiang. And then there is that very irritating literature, which is praising that too. But the thing is that this polarization in Islamism is good because one group is distinguishing from other in terms of the use of violence, which I guess is important. Yeah, let me end.
Thank you.
If I may take just 2 minutes.
Only two.
Only two, because you mentioned the issue of Huays, which are well integrated, well treated compared to Uyghurs, etc. And we don't hear much about them. They don't make the headlines as Uyghurs do. But that's a very well taken point on your part. And that's yet another face and branch of Chinese Islam that they're not all over the media. As a result, we don't react to it. And the second issue is that China, unlike, let's say, Europe and United States, which had a culture to export, as of yet has not been aggressively exporting Chinese culture. Neither is it, let's say, Western powers came with the ideology of democracy, universally supposedly appealing, etc., and exporting much of foreign policy of US, at least the way that it's wrapped. We are exporting democracy, right? China is not exporting socialism with Chinese characteristics. Neither China has a popular culture. Last time I was in Beijing and Shanghai, Chinese youths were listening and dancing to American music, a culture to export. As a result, somebody like David Shamba says, China is not a comprehensive power. Not only militarily, it's not close to the United States. It doesn't have a culture to export. It doesn't have a political ideology to export. And that shields China, accentuating bilateral trade, low profile politically, and low profile culturally. Confucian institutions are very low key in their presence and what they're trying to promote. And that, I would argue, has helped China's economic expansion and without making waves. And that is music to the ear of the not only leaders, but also people in many parts of the world that have come through a bitter experience of colonialism, in which also so-called cultural imperialism was a part of enterprise. China does not have that. And that's a significant issue to understand.
Thank you. Let's have some questions from our audience.
Thank you. Again, quite interesting papers. In the context of the last paper and the discussant, which were more nuanced than the first two papers with regard to the use of history. And as a historian of the Tang Dynasty, I have to come in and say that the narrative was very problematic. You said China does not export culture. It seems China has exported its historical narrative. And the 641, China always says that the reason for expansion was an invitation from the other place. And that's exactly what happened in 640. And then I think it should be kept in mind that there were persecution of Islam in the Tang Dynasty. There was a Yangzhou massacre in the 7th century. There was a massacre in the 9th century in Guangdong of the Muslims, Persian and Arabs. The Battle of Talas in 751, important. I think as part of the Belt and Road narrative, these kinds of conflicts that were quite present in the paper on Turkey has been hidden. And then that's what China is perhaps not exporting Confucianism, but it is exporting its view on history. And unless we critically understand the history that has been presented from the Chinese sources, because they are so extensive, there may not be the records from the Persian side. It's quite problematic to uncritically accept the conflicts, the problems that have existed between Islam and the Chinese regimes, not only the current regime, but in the past, right? I think what my question was, how much of this nuance aspect of Islam in China is understood in Iran? It's not just a Uyghur issue, right? You said the Uyghur are not suffering. No, they are suffering, right? You can't publish anything on Islam in China these days. It's not about Uyghur, right? And then so it's a wider problem than just a Uyghur. Uyghur is a territorial issue. I mean, that comes out because Eastern Turkestan may be forgotten by others, but it's not forgotten by the Chinese government. They are always careful about that. It can happen, right? But the Hui and other Islam is a problem. First, and this comes back to the discussion issue about monotheism. You know, they have incorporated Buddhism as a Chinese religion, but not Islam and Christianity. So what is it, right? There is a religious aspect beyond the territorial aspect that we have to be very careful about. Why has Christianity and Islam not fitted into the Chinese society, right? I think we have to be very careful about understanding the Islam that exists in China. My question, the second question is, you know, when is Islam going to matter in Iran with regard to what's happening with the Uyghurs? So have they forgotten that protecting Muslims is a cause? It's not just in China, in India as well. When the current regime in India is persecuting Muslims, when is Iran going to speak up about the persecution of Muslims elsewhere in the world? Or is it too pragmatic to just benefit from economic reasons and forget that there are Muslim nations? Does religion does not matter at all in Iran?
Professor Palmer.
So maybe, these were all really interesting papers, and I also really appreciated both the analysis of the complexity of the contemporary situation, as well as a lot of historical depth in all of these papers. I wanted to just pick up on, and it also maybe also picks up with Danson's comment, but of Manochehr, you mentioned that as there's this increasing movement toward strategic autonomy of different countries in the region. And so you said that with that movement, there's more pragmatism, and the ideological Islamism or religious factor actually becomes less important. And that confirms it was actually a shock to me. I went to Saudi Arabia. And in fact, in a sense, the entire premise of this project fell apart for me because I thought, well, China is engaging, for example, an exemplary paradigmatic country in the BRI is Saudi Arabia, which I imagined as a deeply ideologically religious country. And then I discovered that it is undergoing a process of profound de-religionization and turning religion into local culture in a sense. And that religion is not a factor. It's really being completely pushed out of the equation, or at least it appears that way. And it makes me, I just wonder, so this is just a question, and I'm curious what you think about it, that because as we've heard from these discussions of Islamism or right, in its various guises and forms, whether it's in Turkey or in Iran, a lot of this is actually a result or a reaction to the challenge of the West, and that is one of forcing onto Muslim countries either Christianity or secularism, and really pushing those two on these countries. And so the reaction to that is a highly ideological form of religion, of Islamism. So what happens when China comes in? It's a secular country, but actually it is neither forcing a form of religion nor forcing a form of secularism. And so does that in a kind of a consequence of that is actually more secularization in these countries. I'm just curious, because a lot of these ideological dynamics are, even though they would be internal to these countries such as Turkey or Iran, they are reacting to, at least to some degree, to what is coming from the outside. So if China coming in with that kind of approach, highly secular internally, but not interfering with the religious ideologies or religious beliefs of those countries, whether Iran or Saudi Arabia or whatever, at some level, it actually diffuses the religious issue and lowers down the ideological temperature of religion in some of these countries. That's, I don't know, that's just kind of, I'm wondering about some broader, like more long-term historical trends that could be the result of China coming into the scene. I had a question for Professor Reisinezhad. Right, actually, you're yeah. Arash, exactly, Arash. That's easier for me. Yes. You talked about the China lobby. So you're saying on the one hand, actually the youth that's going in another direction. But who is this China lobby exactly? And you're saying that they're promoting a China model. But I'm curious about that because I remember actually this was 30 years ago when I was first living in China, and I became very good friends with an Iranian. He did not come to, he was studying in China, but he didn't come directly from Iran, it was via Canada. But he told me, but he grew up in Iran and everything. And he said, but actually China and Iran is the same. The only difference is one is the Communist Party, the other one is the Islamist Party. The content of the ideology is different, but otherwise it's just the same. There's this party in charge with ideological, but everybody is pretending to play along. And for his analysis as an Iranian was Iran already has the China model. So what is it exactly about the China model that people are trying to promote in Iran? What do they see? What do they see the difference between the China model and the Iranian system? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm afraid we're running out of time. I'm so sorry. I saw you, but we have only. We have only 10 minutes, so if you could briefly give your comments, thoughts, and we will be delighted to continue our discussion during our lunchtime. Thank you.
Okay. Right to left again. Right. Okay, let's start with the last question, Chinese lobby. So I think the argument of, your friend's argument is wrong because the Islamic republics lacks a strong party system. There are a bunch of networks, let's say mafias, I don't know. It's the system of the Islamic Republic system has been much more close to Russian system. That's why the military elements in Iran, the IRGC, they applaud Vladimir Putin. They like him. They like Putin, but they aspire of having a country like China. It's paradoxical. Why China is important for these hardliners, conservative, wing of the Islamic Republic? Because the most important request in society and polity in Iran is development. And Russia is not a good sample for developing country like Iran. So that's why they are bluffing that, okay, we want to make a society just like China, but they couldn't. Again, because of the lack of party system, a strong party system, and also the economic situation in Iran. The economic system is not based on free markets. It's a combination of socialism and then a branch of free market. It's a, I mean, amalgamation of all these stuff, you know. What's that? No, no, I mean, China, at least, it has I mean, private companies. But in Iran, there is a kind of hidden rule that private companies should not be great. Only IRGC buy a most important portion of that. So, I mean, there's a, I mean, superficially and apparently the Iranian companies are private, but if you go deep down, all of them are government-based. So that's why the economic situation in Iran is really bad. And regarding regarding support for Muslim, for example, in Kashmir, well, of course, the geopolitical I mean, factors are much more important for the Islamic Republic rather than, I mean, the religious one. The Islamic Republic needs religious language to justify its foreign policy. So the Islamic Republic kept its silence towards Uyghur, towards Chechnya in Russia, and but I mean, tried to talk about Kashmir. Why? Because India is closing to the US. That's why they talk about Muslim Kashmir. And the last one is about I mean, the history. The only documented, I mean, the critically documents that reports a kind of war between Iran and China dates back to 105 BC between Emperor Wudi and Parthian king. I mean, it's very critical. I mean, there is no, documents that verify the issue. Yeah, Chinese documents. So again, if you take a look at the history of Iran, there is no negative image of Chinese. I mean, it's not true for Russians. Russians from the very get-go, they had a negative image in Iranian history, not in even 19th century. And the last one, the last one is one of the elements that the Iranian elites, non-governmental elites, are trying to criticize Chinese is that China intentionally or unintentionally has bypassed Iran's territory in regarding corridors. For example, there are a bunch of middle corridor, trans-Caspian corridors. They bypass the Iranian corridor, the territory, and that's why, I mean, there is no real strong economic connection between Iran and China.
Okay, very briefly, regarding some of the points that you made, historical events and all that, I did not have the space to allocate all the wonderful nuance which you introduced, which has to be integrated in any objective historical analysis that doesn't whitewash what happened in history. I'm all with you on that. China's export of culture. What I believe in that China is not yet in a position, as let's say the United States has a pop culture that has been commodified in exports in remote corners of the world, and youth of the world, for whatever reason, find it very appealing, no matter where they are. China is not yet in that position to do that. But does that mean China is not trying to have cultural influence in different parts of the world? Belt and Road Initiative very explicitly says that part of our mission is also cultural ties and expansion of the cultural ties. I think Chinese leaders understand that very well, that in the long term, you cannot be effective presence economically, politically, if there is no legitimate cultural underpinning to your presence. And so that's understood. And the point that David made regarding secularization, I think by occupying the seats of power, the clergy, which is supposed to be embracing a spiritual world and moral values that are going to elevate the society, have corrupted religion in the name of power politics. And that has created seed of secularization in the society at large. 80% of Iranian people now, I can say this with certainty, having read some of the sociological data on this, they aspire for a secular government. And the youth is absolutely, their vision is westward looking, not toward China culturally, democratically, because they regard China as no model to be emulated politically, but model of democracy is much more appealing to them. And that secularization has taken roots in profound ways. There are cracks in the apparatus of power, moral foundation of the regime that I would say were next few more fundamental shaking in the societal uprising that would place that crack may lead to the collapse. I don't say that's going to happen immediately. I know this regime is very resilient. I've written about populism and its populist base that exists in the society. That is constituency that receives money, privileges, and Arash just talked about control of the economy by revolutionary guards. These are significant pillars of power that takes fundamental entrance of a larger number of people that we saw last year in the political arena. But make no mistake, Iranian society has become profoundly secularized because of what the regime has done under the name of religion. And China's help in investing in Iranian society has, I would say, potentially, by generating economic development, the level of literacy has gone up tremendously. The number of students that are enrolled in university has expanded. Now women outdo men in enrollment in higher education. And all of that has had profound transformation in Iranian civil society that we are going to see it like an explosion that reveals the lava within as the next one comes in.
Just a few words. That's I don't have much to say anyway. So the thing is that about this easing this religious secular tension, I don't think that China is yet posing a threat that the West posed to the Muslim world. I mean, the Western invasion of ideas, of culture, of everything was so total and so indisputable that it led to this reaction. China is rising power, definitely. Islamists are admiring it, but not there yet. It's not a total invasion. It's not a total assault. And let me finish with my own addition to Persian contribution to China. If you visit the main building, there is the statue of a gentleman who made a significant donation to the foundation of this university. And that gentleman is an Indian Persian. His first name is Hurmuzju. So that's a more immediate contribution to China.
Thank you so much for this exciting discussion. And
Thank you for your indulgence and great questions and comments.
thank you, everyone. We'd like to invite you for lunch, dessert, just here in the next room, and have a good time. And we'll see you in 1 hour, same place. Thank you.